If I handed you this piece of rope, you would be able to actually feel this rope. This is called actual texture. So if you're actually feeling something, it's actual texture. If I, however, draw a picture like these elephants, this is called implied texture, where you can't really rub the paper and feel the texture, but the artist has reproduced the texture in a way that it looks like you could feel it. So it is implied texture. Here we have the texture of the sweater being shown, the texture of the skin and the mustache. And then we have wood grain, and then our skull. And here are some scales on the iguana, and some other various textures that are actually implied texture. So if you wanted to take your hand drawings to the next level, then you would start to look at the wrinkles in your hand and the fine lines. Here is an etching by a famous artist, and you can see his application of texture. And so we're going to take this idea and do 3 texture boxes, one of a seashell, one of bubble wrap, and then one of a peanut. What I want you to do in your sketchbook or on drawing paper is to create 3 boxes side by side, and these boxes are 3 inches by 3 inches. So not a huge box, but enough room for us to work in. So we're going to approach some of these differently. For the seashell, the whole box is not shaded, so we're actually going to go in and sketch out the shape of the seashell very lightly to begin with. I'm going to take into consideration those negative shapes. So this kind of comes in and cuts in the corner. This top part comes over about midway and dips down, and then it goes out till about the middle of the box. And then down below we have some curves. So one that's not so big, then we have a big one, and then we have another big one, and then it sort of disappears off the page. So you don't have to get this perfect. We can go back and adjust this later on if we need to. But do keep the outlines pretty light. And what I want to do now is go ahead and begin by lightly shading this seashell shape. So we don't really have any details, we just have the outer outline of this. And if you have a set of drawing pencils, if you have anything in the H range of pencils, like an HB, then you can use your HB pencil because it's the lightest, one of the lightest pencils. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fill this in. We can go and clean it up a little bit later, but try not to make it too scribbly. If it's looking scribbly, just do another layer over the top until it looks a little smoother. Now what I'm going to do is just make a note of where my light values are and where my highlights are. So if we look on the top of these hilltops, so where it curves up here at the bottom, we're going to have a highlight across this ridge. So they're wider toward the front. You're going to have to use your eraser and just lift up that value. They're almost triangular. They're a little more natural than just a straight triangle. But they're wider in the front, so they go the width of that hill that you created, and then they just narrow toward the back. There's one hidden here, and one on the edge to the back left corner. And one over here to the right. So we have basically our middle values or our halftones, sometimes called midtones or halftones. And now what we're going to do is plot out our shadows. So we have highlights, midtones, and now we're going to do shadows. So I can look, if you remember back when we drew the sphere, we talked about core shadows, and that's where the object starts to turn away from the light. Well, where it starts to turn away from the light is usually where it's the darkest. So at on the right side of these hilltops is where our core shadow is going to be. So don't push too hard. We don't want this black, but we are going to darken it. And we can come back and do another layer later on if we want this even darker. But to break it down in an easier way for you to understand, it looks as if our light source is over here to the left. So that means the right side of our hilltop is going to be shaded. So you don't want just a line. You're going to actually blend this out. So I'm creating a shadow on the right side of the hill that fades to the white of the next hill. Okay, so it sort of fades out. I'm going to do the same thing here and on every single one of these hills. So find your highlight on the right side of it, create a shadow that fades to the top of the next highlight. Going to zoom in a little bit here. I also forgot a little bit of a highlight on this back edge of the seashell that kind of joins all our hills together. Okay, so now I'm going to look and see where I need to darken in some shadows. So I'm going to go a step darker now. And on this core shadow, it is the darkest, and it actually has a hard edge. So I'm going to come in here and darken this one up significantly. Again, I don't want it like black as you can get it, because our core shadows actually need to be the darkest. Not core shadow, our cast shadow. So I'm just going to darken this in and blend it in to the value we already have, just to give it another little layer of shading. Okay, now we're going to look. So this one where the arrow is, that is a very hard edge. It's a big jump from dark to light. However, on these other hills where the core shadow is, it is a soft edge. So what we want to do is take this shadow and we want to blend it up on our highlight. Just so we don't have that big jump in value. So this is called a soft edge, where it blends out, where it blends itself out to the light. And then again, hard edge is where you see a big jump in value, like this one right here is. So we're not going to blend it out. It's got a hard edge on our picture reference. Going to blend this one out as well. Going to darken it just a little bit in the back. So I'm just patiently building up my values. So here's my softening of that core shadow, blending it into the highlight. I'm going to make the shadow down here just a little bit darker. Okay, Now we want to really make the seashell stand off the page. So what I want you to do for the cast shadow is right up under the hills. So here's my hill. We're going to make this super dark. So when you first start, you're going to have to go along with the curve of the hill. But then as you come down, I want you to start to flatten that shadow out so that you're shading horizontally. And then I want you to let it fade. Okay, so I push down hard at the top of the hill for my cast shadow. And then I gradually bring that value out horizontally and let it fade into the foreground. You're basically going to do that all across the front. I think I'm going to make my cast shadow a little bit more dramatic than the one in this picture, just so it really stands off the page. And so there's no need for an outline here because we have a hard edge that does the outlining for us. The hard edge between the cast shadow and the seashell itself. So right up under the hills, there's a hard edge, and it does all the outlining we need. Now let's take this one step further. We have some stripes on our seashell, and these stripes are going to really make this look three-dimensional. So I'm not going to do as many as what we see on this picture, and I'm probably going to just space them out. But what I'm going to do is come in and to make really curvy stripes. Okay, so if it's on the hill, it curves up. In the valley, it curves down, curves up. And the curvier you make this, the more three-dimensional it's going to seem. So again, just make, I would say at least 5 stripes. You're just going to follow it as it goes up and down these curves. If you make these too flat, then it's going to flatten out your seashell. You've got to follow the width of the highlight also. You don't want to get it wider than that area. So again, you don't have to do this many. I'm just trying to fill mine in. It doesn't take very long. This will probably be my last one. Okay, so here we have a seashell. And now if you look at it and you think, oh, I need to go in and darken that, that's no problem. Just go in and darken it. And I want you to remember, the more layers you put down, the more you need to start shading a little more circularly. And that helps you to blend all these values out to where it needs to go. Now let's look at our bubble wrap texture. For the most part, this whole box is shaded. So I'm going to come in again with the lightest mark that I can make. Lightest pencil that I own. And I'm just going to fill in this whole box. Remember, you don't want to fight the weight of your hand, so hold the pencil back toward the opposite end of your lead and just barely let it touch the page. So I'm just filling this in. I can come back with an eraser in just a moment, and then I can clean up my edges. So super, super light. And again, if it looks too scribbly, just go in and do another layer. to smooth it out. Okay, I'm gonna come in with my eraser and clean up. Now we've got our base layer of value down. Now we're gonna create our push and pull, just like the other things. So the majority of these bubbles have the bright white highlight. So I'm just gonna use my eraser to draw these. So this top one is sort of in the corner, and you don't have to have these perfectly placed. Next one, we're only seeing half circles here. If you want to sketch them out and then start erasing highlights, you can. This next layer starts and it's shifted down. Let me redo that one. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just practice. So they're kind of offset from each other. And I'm not going to have room to quite do this other row, so as much as what we see on the picture. So I'm just going to quickly do a half circle here. So now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to erase some of these highlights. I'm just going to lighten the middle of the circles up. And you don't have to necessarily erase them fully back to white. You can leave a few streaks here and there because we're actually seeing some wrinkles happening in these. So we've got our highlights pulled up. I have a few sort of in between some of these bubbles, but for the sake of us being beginners, we're going to kind of avoid those for now. And we're going to treat all of these bubbles almost the same. So when I look at this, I want to find my core shadow. The core shadow, again, is where your object turns away from the light. And the core shadow, for the most part, is on the bottom edge of each bubble. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to start to build those up. And these bubbles aren't very deep, so we don't see a whole lot of transition of fading out up onto the bubble. Some of them have hard edges. I think the majority of them have a hard edge. But what I am going to do is blend this shadow out to the top of the next bubble. So really dark underneath the bubble, blend it out to the top of the next one. So this just takes a little bit of patience, but if you kind of get in the mode of doing something repetitious like this, it can be sort of relaxing if you allow it to be. So this hard edge of this core shadow is helping us to outline these bubbles. Although it's not an outline, it's a shadow. Okay, so I have a shadow under each and every bubble. Now, the top of the bubble is not actually pure white. So what I'm going to come in and do is a little bit of shading on the tops and let them fade down just a little bit. And if you lose an edge, I accidentally lost this one. I'm going to come back and re-highlight that edge. So another thing that you can do is just sort of come in and make a few little dark shadows in them just to give the impression here and there that there is a wrinkle within the bubble. If we had time, we could stop and look at every single bubble, but we're just treating sort of each bubble the same way. And if you mess up, just use your eraser and fix it. I'm adding a little bit more shadow down here on this bottom bubble around it just so we can see it. Alright, if you can't see the top edge of your bubbles, then you can create a very light shadow that fades downward. And not all of them need to be seen that much. Or you can take the shadow from around it and fill it in a little bit more. Okay. Now, on some of these, you may also, I think I did this in some of them, I kind of lost some of my bright, shiny highlights. And so, as a last little step, I'm just going to go in and polish those bright white highlights up. Okay, so here's my eraser, and I'm just going to find a few here and there just to make it a little brighter. So with shading, it's about having patience and going back and forth between your values. And oftentimes, the more contrast you can have between your values. So if I have the darkest darks all the way to the lightest lights, so a full range of value from black to white, it's going to make your drawing really stand out. So I could even come back and push a few of these shadows just a little bit darker than they are and make them really pop. Alright, I think that's enough for now. This is just a practice. We're not getting a super polished piece, but hopefully you've gotten the idea here. Okay, let's go to our peanut texture. And for the most part, this peanut is, the whole box has a shade or value to it. There's very few like bright white highlights. So I'm again gonna come in and shade the whole box, my lightest value, just to go ahead and knock the white off the page. And one thing you can do if you can't get this bottom layer of value smooth enough is you can take a paper towel and just kind of buff it. And just sort of rub it with the paper towel and blend it. Now when we go to shade, I know that it's very tempting to use your fingers to smudge, use a blending stump to smudge. But as a beginner, I want you to stay away from that, because a lot of times beginners overblend and then they do away with all their good value changes. And so where you have a full range of value from black all the way to, dark darks to medium lights to white, you have that full range of value and you go and you overblend, then you're doing away with over half your values. So for now, stay away from smudging when you go to blend. But having said that, for now, if you want to get this box really smooth, you can, just for this base layer of value, you can smudge it with a paper towel or a Kleenex and blend it out. Okay, now we're gonna come in and do a little bit of sketching. So you don't want to have any dark outlines around anything, but we're gonna come in and just sort of lay out our peanut. And so again, looking at my negative space, I have about that much space in between the bottom of the page and my peanut because this is really zoomed in. I have this dividing line in between the peanut, and that'll sort of serve as where the coarse shadow begins. And then we have all these little pits where the peanut, actual texture of the peanut. So I'm going to come in and just sort of map some of these in. They're very irregular, and I'm not going to spend time making mine look exactly like this peanut texture just because this is practice. And so I'm taking some artistic liberties to come in and just do my own thing. But you don't want it to look like it's, really rigid geometric shapes. These are really sort of organic shapes that are happening. So they're kind of free flowing, kind of side by side. Some are longer than others. I'm going to do another layer down here. You don't want them all the same size. All right, I filled my space there. Now I'm going to come up to the top and do the same thing. All right, so I've got everything sort of sketched in. Now I'm going to take a look at where my brightest areas are. Actually, let's do this a little bit differently. Before I start shading the pits of my of this texture, I'm going to start with the shadow down at the bottom of the peanut, not the cast shadow, but the shadow that's actually on the peanut. And so this, let me get rid of the ruler. There's a shadow that's happening down here in the bottom. So before I go too much further, I'm going to put a little bit, not super dark shading, but definitely darker than it is. And I'm going to blend it upward. And maybe just a little bit underneath this ridge. Sort of like the seam of the peanut. Okay, now I'm going to come in with my eraser and do my highlights. So toward the top of the peanut, we're going to see a lot more highlights, and they're going to be in between these pits that we've created. So just take your eraser and go between the pits. Not every little section has those brightest white highlights. I'm gonna hit the majority of them and leave a few of them without having bright white highlights. Okay, and then I have a few down here, even in the darker area. Not everywhere, just sort of in this little area. And right now my erasing is a little bit scratchy just because I don't have my tools set accurately. Okay, so that's about all the highlight that I need down in the bottom. So I've gotten the areas in between the pits. Now I'm going to come in and let me get this just a little bit better. I'm going to come in and shade the inside of my pits. And it's going to make them really be set apart from the rest of the shell. Okay? So if I look at the majority of the pits, the inside of these little boxes, for the most part, the tops of the boxes are in shadow and then it fades downward. Okay, so we're going to shade the tops of the pits. And then we're going to blend it out into the value that's already there. Top of the pit, down. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing down here in the bottom. I might get a little bit darker. So with your pencil, you want to push down just a little bit harder. So again, this is just one of those things that you keep repeating the steps, and it sort of becomes you can almost zone out while you do it. I have a few, I have a few little pits up here toward the top. I want to go back in and darken just ever so slightly. Not all of them, just a few, just to make them really pop. And then this line that happens in the peanut, the seam of the peanut, I'm actually going to come in and make it a bit of a shadow that blends outward down toward the bottom. Now I want to come in with my eraser and just a few places down here at the bottom I want to lighten up in between the pits just a little bit more than what it is, just to give it a little bit of contrast between the pits and the area around the pits. Okay, to make this pop out, again, the magic happens when you create the cast shadow. So on the cast shadow, that's the darkest part of our drawing. So right up under the peanut, let's push down pretty hard. And then you're going to let this fade downward. And this shadow actually has to sort of take the shape of the peanut itself. So make it super dark right up under the peanut and let it fade downward. And now as one final touch, I'm going to take this darker value that I just created and again go back just to help tie it in to our peanut just a little bit more. A few of these pits one more time. I'm going to come in and push my values even darker, mainly on these bottom ones. I got this one a little too dark, so I'm just going to adjust it. And with this program, I have to adjust the pressure, adjust the color as well as the pressure of my hand. Okay, so let's zoom out. And there you have it. You have 3 textures. And they really didn't take all that long. It just takes a little patience and a little knowledge on blending your values from dark to light, as well as knowledge on where you should have a hard edge and where you should have a soft edge. So should there be a big jump in value to create a clean, crisp edge, like where our cast shadows meet our objects? Or should you have a soft edge between shadows where you have your shadow but it's blended out? So you have to keep all these things in mind when you shade and practice those things, and soon you'll be able to see these value changes for yourself, and you'll be able to draw all by yourself and without any help. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me and I'll help.